event connected with the signal, then perhaps it would be easier for you to understand that this is going on a lot on all different levels, and 90% of the time you're not aware that the information you see on television is in fact not really meant for you. It's meant for another targeted sub-part of the population.
Well, I could buy that, but I still have trouble buying that an organization that was so organized and so complex that they send out information this way would, on the other hand, be so sloppily monitored that your people could, with very little effort, gain at least some preliminary access to this the information that you were talking about, the strange codes and the phone numbers and all that stuff.
Well, we'll just have to see where it leads.
Well, anyway, that wasn't my major point. My major point was, if you're talking about levels of worldwide organization, you know, that are so huge that want this information suppressed, wouldn't it take another organization counteracting them to protect people like you who are trying to get the information out? I mean, have you ever thought that the reason that you haven't been harmed or, you know, disappeared is because there's somebody protecting you?
You know, I haven't really thought about that a lot. I was having lunch today with a friend, and I was trying to describe that what we're dealing with in terms of information and its importance is not at the normal level of human conflict or conceit. The rules are very different. And if you start getting into the mystery schools, you find that a lot of times the information is only secret until you ask the question. And by asking the question, you automatically become privy to the information. It's like the axiom, when the student is ready, the teacher will show up. I had one of our researchers, you know, go to the National Archives the other day, and there was a particular person sitting at a particular desk, and the first thing that she asked my researcher was, "What are you seeking?" Not, "What are you looking for?" or, you know, "How can I help you?" but "What are you seeking?" And her desk is 333, and her phone code is 333. Now, that may be totally coincidental, or it may be meaningful. This is an area which is very gray, which historically, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, has been marked by ambiguity precisely to keep those who should not know from even beginning to ask the right question. But as soon as you ask the right question, you're in.
Well, I could buy that, I guess.
Well, it's historical. You don't have to buy it. It's in any book on, you know, mystery schools that you want to pick out of the library. It's kind of, you know, Mystery Schools 101. Things get more interesting from there.
Thanks for your call. Hi, you're on the wee hours.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I want to thank you, Mr. Hoagland, for your work over the years. This is very interesting material. I'd like to take this back to the Cassini mission, because I heard the broadcast on Roy's show also, and you have said that all of these space efforts seem to have certain hidden agendas, and I'd like to know, in regard to the Cassini mission, what patterns you see as far as what their hidden agenda for this mission might be.
That's a really interesting question. You know, I hate to admit it, but I've been so involved with Mars that I actually haven't had a lot of time to focus on Cassini. I do know that it's taking, you know, the long way home.
Yeah.
They launch it, and this has to do with engineering limitations of using rockets. It's a very heavy spacecraft. It carries a lot of instrumentation. But it has to go looping around through the inner solar system to pick up enough energy on these Earth swing-bys to be, you know, billiard balled out to Saturn over 7 or 8 years. I haven't looked at the launch times or day. I haven't looked at the arrival times with the computer to see if it matches some of this extraordinary Egyptian pattern that we found now in many of the other missions. But I almost don't have to, because I'm sure it does. The point is that all of this frontier find out new knowledge appears to be bounded by an incredibly ancient ritual that goes back to some of these mystery schools operating in a place that we would never imagine it should be operating, which is, sterile, secular engineering NASA. That's the first astonishing surprise. The next surprise to me, and this is why I'm going to come back to the politics, is the kind of the brouhaha over the plutonium on Cassini. True, this is probably the most plutonium we've ever launched. But in fact, NASA and the DoD have been launching missions fueled by plutonium for electricity for 30 years. And, the Apollo missions were, for me, the pointed example, because on Apollo 13, when the spacecraft, the lunar module, looped around the moon and brought them home in the lifeboat mode, when they abandoned her, Aquarius, just above the atmosphere, the plutonium carried in that package for the instruments designed to be set down on the moon wound up in the bottom of one of the deepest trenches of the Pacific Ocean somewhere off New Zealand. And when I was with Cronkite and CBS at that time, we were concerned that there would be radioactive release because it was barreling in at 25,000 miles per hour, and the casing and the cladding and the shielding around it would melt, and we were worried that there would be a release. Now, we were told that sniffer aircraft went out with Geiger counters sampling the reentry paths to see whether any plutonium was released, and we were told it was negative. Of course, those were the days when we believed that NASA told us what was going on. I mean, maybe it did release radioactivity and they never told us.
I believe that Warren James on Hour 25 was talking about just that when he was saying that it was fished out and it was reused.
No, that was a
Not that?
that was a transit satellite off Cape Canaveral. They had a rocket, a Navy satellite, lifted off and blew up, and the plutonium canisters were literally retrieved off Cape Canaveral, and they were refurbished and reused.
Is it a similar type of situation?
Well, they were smaller.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was more plutonium for the Alceps on Apollo than for the transit satellites for the Navy. The point is that I've been looking at this sudden fuss over the plutonium on Cassini, and I've been asking what I hope is a deeper, more profound question, which is, why has NASA been targeted suddenly for an organized outside campaign questioning its veracity, its honesty, its forthcomingness, etc., but not on the issue of data or artifacts or civilizations, but on something that most people can get their heads around that is very up close and personal, namely, am I going to die of cancer after inhaling plutonium? And my question goes to, is this part of a concerted attack on the system at a level that a lot of people can understand over an issue that will involve a lot of people, whereas in fact the real war is a deeper, more profound, we have an agency which has been hiding most of the good stuff it's found and only letting us in on dribs and drabs that someone thinks we can handle.
Okay, well, I'd like to stay with my question regarding Saturn. Is there any, do you see any special significance or special interest that they might have in wanting to do a Saturn mission?
Let me get back to that. In 1980 and 81, the Voyager missions that were launched in 77 and went to Jupiter and then went to Saturn and went on to Uranus and Neptune, these two missions went by Saturn a few months apart. And at Saturn, they discovered, in fact, one of the experiments that was organized or prosecuted or managed by a friend of mine, Dr. Jim Warwick, who was then at the University of Colorado, a brilliant radio astronomer who had done most of his work on lightning and lightning discharges and radio waves emitted from lightning discharges on Earth. He became the principal investigator, the chief scientist in charge of an experiment flown on Voyager 1 and 2, among other places, Saturn, that was listening for radio waves coming from this giant planet. And in both encounters, the first Voyager and then 9 months later the second one, his planetary radio astronomy experiment, the PRA, picked up bizarre and wondrous and mysterious and incredibly important radio emissions from Saturn. And there's a very long and complex detective story, which I wrote as a cover piece for, among other things, Science Digest in, I can't remember the year. It was in the early 80s, or 81, 82, somewhere around there. And then I also did a piece for Analog describing this whole mystery story. And the bottom line was, what was causing the radio emissions? It turns out that the source was in the middle of the rings of Saturn. It was carving out a 100-meter wide clear path in a section of the rings that's opaque for 3,000 miles. And one of the possibilities was it was an artificial station left by extraterrestrials.
And on that note, thank you so much for the call, and thank you so much, Richard.
Event connected with the signal, then perhaps it would be easier for you to understand that this is going on a lot on all different levels, and 90% of the time you're not aware that the information you see on television is in fact not really meant for you. It's meant for another targeted sub-part of the population.
Well, I could buy that, but I still have trouble buying that an organization that was so organized and so complex that they send out information this way would, on the other hand, be so sloppily monitored that your people could, with very little effort, gain at least some preliminary access to this the information that you were talking about.
I was having lunch today with a friend, and I was trying to describe that what we're dealing with in terms of information and its importance is not at the normal level of human conflict or conceit. The rule...
Wouldn't it take another organization counteracting them to protect people like you who are trying to get the information out? I mean, have you ever thought that the reason that you haven't been harmed or, disappeared is because there's somebody protecting you?
I haven't really thought about that a lot.
The strange codes and the phone numbers and all that stuff.
Well, we'll just have to see where it leads.
Well, anyway, that wasn't my major point. My major point was, if you're talking about levels of worldwide organization, that are so huge that want this information suppressed,